So today's lesson is on lesson 4-2 from our textbook. It's on determining the initial value, which is the y-intercept, and determining the rate of change, which is the slope. And first thing we're going to be doing is determining these values from a graph. So here's the graph. I've already highlighted the y-intercept, which is what we're trying to figure out, because there we want to figure out the point where the y-intercept, where the line intersects the y-axis. As you can see on number 1, the point that the line intersects the y-axis is the point, or the ordered pair, 0, positive 3, and so the y-intercept is going to be positive 3. Very simple. It's always going to be the y value when x equals 0. Now the next thing we want to figure out is the slope, which is rise over run. So we want to figure out our rise, which we've been doing already. And so I've chosen those 2 points, and I'm going to go downward. And so as you can see, my line is going up. So I've already put my positive sign to make sure. So when I go down, my rise ends up being negative 3. Now the increments are by 1, so you always want to check your increments. My run is negative 3 because I go to the left 3 places. You divide negative 3 by negative 3, and you end up with positive 1, so our slope is positive 1. Now let's look at number 2. That's our y-intercept. That is where the line intersects the y-axis at the ordered pair 0, 4. And the ordered pair 0, 4, the y value is 4, and so that's our y-intercept, positive 4. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out our rate of change, which is our slope, which is rise over run. So let's figure out the rise. Now this line is going downward, so it's going to have a negative slope. So I'm going to go ahead and put my negative sign. Next thing I want to do is want to figure out my rise. Now I wanted to show you guys that each increment is 2. The green line that I drew is 4, so each increment ends up being a 2, and so you want to be aware of that. Let me go ahead and erase that. And so let's use that. Because each increment is 2, I'm going down 2 grid lines, but because each grid line is 2, I'm going down 4, so my rise is negative 4. My run on the x-axis, I've drawn the line all the way to negative 8 to show you that that's 1, 2, 3, 4 grid lines. So once again, on the x-axis, my interval is going to be by 2s. So I'm going to go to the right, and I go over 2, but that is not quite to the point yet. But so halfway there is 1 additional, so my run ends up being positive 5. Now we check to see if we can simplify. Negative divided by positive is a negative, and 4/5 cannot simplify, so my slope is negative 4/5. Now let's go on to the next type of problem we learned today, which is given a table, and you guys got to figure out the slope and the y-intercept. Now today during class we called it rate of change. That is the slope, the rate of change, and we called the y-intercept the initial value. So let's look at number 3. We've already done this before where you figure out the rate of change. So for number 3, the rate of change is going to be the change in y over the change in x. So to go from 10 to 19 is by 9, and we're adding 9 each time we go up in our y-axis. So that means our rate of change for the y is going to be positive 9. Now for our x-axis, it increases by 3s. There's by 3, and there's by 3. And because it's a consistent, steady, constant rate of change, our change in x is positive 3. Now we're going to simplify. That's an improper fraction, and positive divided by positive is a positive. 9 divided by 3 is 3, and so our slope ends up being 3/1, which is just positive 3. Now our y-intercept is a little bit tricky here, so I'm going to go ahead and erase that, and we have to figure out what the y value is going to be when x equals 0. Now if you remember, proportional relationships have an initial value of 0, 0. This is a non-proportional relationship, so the y value when x is 0 is not going to be 0. So we have to use a method to count downward. Now, as you look on the x values, as you go down, you are subtracting 3. So to get to 0, we subtracted 3. So that's a constant rate of change. When we are going downward, we're subtracting 9. So in order to find the remaining value for y, we need to take 10 and subtract 9 from it. And that gives us a value of positive 1. And so that's our initial value of positive 1, which is the same thing as our slope. Now it's a little difficult to read these, so I'm going to go ahead and change the color. That way you can see that our slope was 3 and our y-intercept was 1. On the next problem, again, we want to figure out the rate of change, which is the change in y over the change in x. And as you can see, we are increasing by 1. On the y values, our change is 1, so let's figure out our change in x. Our changes in x is by 2's, so our change in x is going to be 2, and you cannot simplify that, so we end up with 1/2. Now, going downward on the y's, we end up subtracting 1, and so that fills in our value, because we're already given our 0 value of our y-intercept, our initial value of positive 1. And that's how you figure out the slope and the y-intercept b given a table. Now, sometimes I call it rate of change, sometimes I call it initial value. You guys just got to make sure you guys remember that, number 1, the slope is the same as the rate of change. And also, don't forget that the slope is the same as the unit rate. And don't forget that the initial value is the same thing as the y-intercept b. So as you can see on today's lesson, we just added a little bit to what we have learned up to this moment. And you guys have to do the rest of your problems on your own. All right, thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.